Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. The top-ranked boss, Bob Arum, says if an undisputed fight happens between Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua, it will be the biggest fight in 50 years. He says the closest heavyweight fight it compares to would be the first Ali-Fraser fight, which was in March of 1971. He says the whole world stopped. Why? Because Ali couldn't fight because of the draft situation, couldn't fight for 3.5 years, but he was still undefeated. He captured everyone's imagination. Unfortunately, we didn't have the technology like we have now. We didn't have the satellites domestically like we do now to get the signal. We had to use telephone long lines, and we were limited to the number of people who could watch it. There was no pay-per-view at the time, but still it was by far the biggest fight that I had ever experienced then, and looking back on it now. And I really think Fury Joshua will begin to approach that first Ali-Fraser fight. Well, he could be missing out a few really big fights between then and now, but of course he was involved, so make of it what you will. But certainly an undisputed fight, which we haven't had for a generation, is going to be a big deal if and when it happens. Meanwhile, one of the other promoters involved in trying to make that undisputed fight is also eyeing other big fights. Eddie Hearn says he would still like to make Dillian Whyte versus Deontay Wilder. He says, for me, outside of AJ and Fury, Whyte-Wilder remains one of the biggest fights in boxing. I would love to make that fight. I think Deontay Wilder needs to get back in the ring. I certainly wouldn't be looking to put him in with Dillian Whyte straight off the bat. He needs a fight in my opinion. Presumably he's going to be working with a new team of trainers. And Hearn has also weighed in on the Mark Breland situation and the wider situation with Team Wilder, saying, obviously Mark Breland and JD's and Shelley Finkel and Al Heyman, the old saying, too many cooks spoil the broth. Sometimes a massive team of people that actually aren't all on the same boat can be a disaster. I think in that team now, it's so disjointed and fragmented that I don't know what they're going to do. So that's Hearn talking to Sky Sports, adding, I'll let them to sort out their problems. Hope to see Wilder in the ring soon. Good fighter, great for the sport of boxing. So let's see these fights. Meanwhile, British promoter Frank Warren has announced a couple of cards for the end of March, one on the 26th and one on the 27th, and both feature heavyweights. On the 26th card, you have the return of David Adeleye. So his opponent is still TBA, but just with a less than a handful of fights, he is going to probably be facing someone that's not too good. Let's just keep the expectations in check, but good to see him back out, active. Hopefully it's someone durable enough to give him some rounds and experience, because at this point that's what he needs. A lot of people are high on where David Adeleye could go. He's still relatively young and developing, so he's quite raw at the moment, but looking forward to seeing him return to the ring on the 26th of March. On the 27th, you have Nathan Gorman, so he is going to be facing Kristijan Krstacic, who's a German with a record of 18-2. And that record, on the face of it, it looks respectable, but Krstacic is really not that good. He's a former cruiserweight. He's formerly been banged out by Tom Schwartz in a couple of rounds. This is another sort of soft lob in terms of an opponent for Nathan Gorman. It's at the level or even slightly below Richard Lartey, so that is saying something as well. We know how crude and limited Lartey is. Krstacic, yeah, he's not going to put up too much resistance. But for Gorman's sake, I hope that he comes in shape and he actually puts it on Krstacic, because he is there to be hit, he is there to be taken out. And if he can't take out Krstacic, certainly the questions about his power will persist. I think we know that he's not a huge puncher, but he needs to be getting rid of guys like this that really are not on his level. At this point, Krstacic is no more than German domestic level. And also for Gorman, he needs to be coming in shape. For that Lartey fight, he was too heavy. He said he's going to be in better condition for this fight, so hopefully he is putting the work in the gym. He has been posting different shots on social media of late of him training, etc. But we know social media can be gamed, a la Lucas Brown a few years back. So let's hope Nathan Gorman comes prepared and actually is in better physical condition, because if he does doesn't look good against Krstacic, or this, labours to another, dreadful points decision where it's hard to watch, it's not going to be good for his prospects going forward. But this is not a fantastic fight, but on the rebuild, I guess I can understand it to some point. I was hoping for a slightly better opponent, but I guess it is what it is at this point. It has been announced. And a few other fights that have been announced around the place. Simon Kean, he will be returning to the ring in April. He will be on a card that is headlined by David Lemieux, but Kean is also one of the features you can see here by the promo poster. His opponent, not announced at least on social media, but on BoxRec, they do have it as Stan Surmacz. So he's a Canadian with a record of 12-1, but the record is deceptive because when you look at it, actually it's pretty thin. There's not a lot there. Surmacz has really been facing guys that either very early in their career, 3 or less fights, or they're just journeymen. So I'm not expecting much of this, but then again, from some of the performances Simon Kean's had of late, he hasn't looked fantastic. For example, when he fought Sergey Lyakovich, he really laboured in that fight and looked a bit gun-shy, remembering he was knocked out a couple of years ago and he came back to avenge that defeat against Dylan Carmen. However, he does look like perhaps he could be damaged goods, so this is really quite the soft lob, but it is going to be broadcast on Canadian TV. So there is a quote. It says, "For the first time in more than a year, fans will be able to see a boxing gala on a specialty television channel." So it's going to be on TVA Sports, including homemade boxes and quality fights featuring some of their favourites, including David Lemieux and Simon Kean. Yada yada yada, presented by Eye of the Tiger Management, which promotes both of those fighters. So I'm not expecting, if this is the opponent, it's not a great fight. I'm not expecting Simon Kean to have too many issues, but then again, he has looked a bit iffy in some recent fights, so we'll see where that goes. But a guy who's been calling him out, apart from Adam Braidwood, is Dylan Carmen. Carmen obviously beat Kean, handed him that loss, and then he avenged it a year later. But he says, you're fighting in April, it should be against me. I won the first fight, you won the second, and now we settle the third bout. Or are you too scared? Hashtag Teddy Bear Kean, and then some other hashtags. So at this point, BoxRec at least lists it as Stan Surmacz. So possibly Carmen is sort of on the outside looking in. But based on him facing Arslan Bekmambetov whenever it was a year ago, Carmen, you have to question whether his sort of chin has cracked now, because he was basically knocked out with the first shot that landed. So I'm not really sure where Carmen is at, or if even we need to see a third fight at this point. And rounding out this heavyweight news mashup video, you have Timothy Moten back on the 20th of February. So he will be featuring on a pay-per-view card. So his opponent's still TBA, so we're about a week out from the fight. So don't expect much on the opponent front. But the cost of the event, as you can see here by the post on screen, pay-per-view $29.99. So, I'm not sure what the demand will be for that, given that cost. But when you go to BoxRec and have a look at the card, it's massive. This looks like there's about 15 fights on that card. So, voluminous, perhaps you can justify the cost that way. But Timothy Moten, he is a guy that trained with Anthony Joshua, sparred him in that rematch for the Andy Ruiz Jr. fight back in 2019. Since then, he hasn't really been able to get too much traction in terms of meaningful sort of step-up fights for his career, but he is still grinding away. So we'll see what he can do in the remainder of 2021. But there's a number of heavyweights like him who are looking for opportunities. So we'll see what happens. But what do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.